Welcome back to Giants Latest. Hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all things New York Giants. Now, before we get into talking about the play calling real quickly, I was going through a lot of the comments since I was out on vacation, and I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you guys and your support. It does not go unnoticed, and I really appreciate that you go out of your way to especially make kind comments. So it means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Let's talk about Mike Kafka and play calling now. So for those of you who maybe haven't been up to date on OTAs and things like that, Mike Kafka has been calling the plays throughout rookie minicamp and throughout OTAs this year. Now, I think we all remember the whole saga about Kafka and Zabel and the play calling, and honestly, it seems like it's been an issue since day one with both of them here. But I think that Kafka needs to continue to do it this year. And I know that when Kafka was calling the plays back in 2022, a lot of us had issues with that, myself included. I was complaining about some of the play calls that he made. But I think when you can look back now and you can look at what happened in 2022 versus 23 and 24 when Dable was calling the plays, I think ultimately, in my opinion, there's not a huge difference between the two of them calling the plays. What I think is most important and why Kafka should continue to call the plays is because Dable is not a great head coach. There are a lot of things that he needs to improve upon, and I just think that when you're running your own offense and Kafka has experience calling the plays and he has experience calling the plays in this specific offense with a good bulk of this team at this point, then you've got to let him continue to do that so you can focus on what's important. So I think that Kafka needs to continue to call the plays. Now, like I was just saying, is there really a huge difference? And in my opinion, no, because from all of these reports that have come out and from what we know about when Kafka called the plays versus Dable, there were no issues, it sounds like, in 2022 when Kafka was calling the plays. And then, of course, we heard about the whole situation with Wink after the 2023 season. And then, we also hear that there were issues with Dable getting on the mic and interrupting Kafka, and Joe Shane had to get involved. And it was a whole issue, which is something that doesn't get talked about that much. And look, I think that these guys learn and they grow, especially the coaches. And I think that Dable has done that. I still think he drives me insane with some of the same mistakes that he repeatedly makes. But I think ultimately he's learned from a lot of them. And, I just think that whole situation is a huge problem. And what I just want to see moving forward is that if they decide that Kafka is going to call the plays, then Kafka calls the plays, end of story. Let him do it for the entire season. He's running your offense, Dable. And Dable has also said that obviously he's on the headset and that if he doesn't like what Kafka is calling, he's allowed to override that. And he's allowed to jump in and say, no, let's do this one instead. So, which I think is okay. I think they're not always going to agree on play calls, and that's fine. That's one thing versus getting the GM involved on the headsets and have him paying attention to what's going on. That is dysfunction. Dable stepping in every once in a while is fine. You're the head coach. You're allowed to override that. I don't have a problem with that. So I just want it to be made, though, that it's not going to be like week 4, all of a sudden there's a switch up and then Dable's calling the plays again and then he's making stupid mistakes like he does because he can't handle everything that's involved with being a good head coach in the NFL. And I just still think that he has so much more to learn and he has a lot to improve upon that I don't think he needs to call the plays. And I also think that the big reason why I think this is so important is because his job kind of hinges on this. And the reason that I say that is because at the end of the season, he said when him and John Mara had this conversation before the Friday before the week 18 game, he said, I brought up Mike Kafka calling the plays. And I think that they need to stick with that. And I think that it shows that maybe Dable has had a little bit of humility and he's learned there's a lot of things that I need to do as a head coach, and I'm not doing them all effectively. And if Kafka has experience calling plays, he knows the system, yada, 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 then let him do it. And put the trust in Kafka that you believe he's good at doing that and he's capable of doing that. So I want to see Kafka continue to do it. I think it really needs to be proven that Dable is a good head coach. And yes, he won Coach of the Year in 2022. I get that. Since then, he's been a disaster. So maybe it was beginner's luck. Maybe who knows what it really was. We might never know. But I think this year is a really good opportunity for Dable to say, I have a veteran offensive coordinator who has a lot of experience in this league, who has a lot of experience with me and this system. I trust him to call the plays. I have a veteran quarterback who's also been in the NFL a long time, who's won 10 Pro Bowls, who's won a Super Bowl, who has experience doing this. I am putting trust in these guys to help win football games this year. That's what it comes down to. So anyway, I hope that it continues. I think we won't know officially until preseason. I think if Kafka is still calling the plays at preseason, we're in good hands, and hopefully it won't be an issue, but time will tell. So as I was going through the comments, I did see a lot of questions about trades and who should be cut and who should be traded. So we're going to dive into that a lot this week now that it is past June 1st and the cuts are going to be coming, and there's probably going to be a lot of them. So let's start with Jameis Winston, because I think this has been the most obvious trade candidate after the Giants re-signed Tommy DeVito and then drafted Jackson Dart, and of course signed Russell Wilson. So I think that trading Winston should be an option for the Giants. It's something that they should pursue. Now, in my opinion, I think I would like to see them do it during the season. Maybe they have an opportunity to get more value there. Mostly just because I don't really know how I feel about Jackson Dart being the number 2 right now. I just feel like it's so early. There's a lot to learn. And like, if God forbid Russ Wilson gets injured, personally, I want to see Jameis Winston come in and sling the ball around. Like, if he's going to throw interceptions, fine. He's also going to throw touchdowns. And can you just imagine Jameis Winston and Malik Neighbors? Like, that is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So I don't know. I'm not sold on trading Winston just yet, just because we have 4 quarterbacks. The other thing that is also really important to note about, the whole quarterback situation is that you're only allowed a 3rd quarterback as an emergency quarterback on game day, which means that if the Giants keep Jameis Winston, which I think they will, for a couple of reasons, but I think the biggest one being that since Joe Schoen has been here, they have had to play 4 quarterbacks throughout the season because of injuries. So I just think that they're not willing to say we're going to trade away this veteran just because we have Jackson Dart and Tommy DeVito. Like, I don't want to see Tommy DeVito at any point this year. I don't think anyone does, except maybe the real Tommy DeVito lovers, which I get it, but like, we're trying to win football games. So I'm over the Tommy DeVito experiment. I think it's great to have a 4th quarterback. I don't want to see him starting at all. Unless we are fighting for the number 1 roster spot again, or the number 1 draft pick again, then fine, put him in. I don't care at that point. At that point, we're all going to be severely depressed, so it doesn't matter who the quarterback is. But I think the Winston thing is that they just feel like they need that veteran quarterback. They're probably not going to feel confident enough to have Dart as the number 2 just yet, especially in the beginning of the season. And like I said, Dart is only going to be the emergency quarterback, so he's not really going to get any playing time. Assumedly, everyone stays healthy, and hopefully the Giants are winning games. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting. There obviously are teams out there. When you look at the Saints, you could always go back there, and you look at some other teams with quarterback issues. A guy like Kirk Cousins is looking for a trade. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And I think we'll see some movement this summer, but I think there's not really going to be much of it until the season starts. But overall, I want the Giants to keep Jameis Winston right now. I think it's really important to continue to have veterans in the building. And Jackson Dart loves Jameis Winston. In some interview earlier this year, he was talking about how, when a bunch of rookies were asked about what quarterbacks they would want to play with, like who's their ideal quarterback that they get to be in the quarterback room with, everyone's saying Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, and Jackson Dart is saying Jameis Winston. So I think he's a guy that also really appreciates having Winston in the building. He's basically getting to learn and play with one of his idols, and what's better than that? So I think the Giants should keep him, and then, let's see how the season goes before we make any moves like that. But you guys let me know what you think about it. Next up, I want to talk about Darius Slayton because I thought this was very interesting. So ESPN analyst Aaron Schatz chose, that is his real name, I swear to God, he chose the most underrated player for every single team in the NFL. And for the Giants, he chose wide receiver Darius Slayton. And I thought this was interesting because I think when you look at the Giants, you could say there's probably a lot of guys who have potential to take a big step forward this year or to improve or to really make a difference on this football team. And you look at a guy like Darius Slayton, and I know there's so many Giants fans who are just so down on him and are so over him. And I get that. But I think objectively, you have to look at Darius Slayton. He's been a good wide receiver for this Giants. He's not the best number 2 in the league, okay? When you look at other teams who have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, okay, Darius Slayton is not that, but he doesn't have to be. And I think when you look at the fact that he has been the Giants' leading wide receiver 5 out of 6 years with god-awful quarterback play, imagine what he can do with someone like Russell Wilson, who actually can throw an accurate ball to his wide receivers. So This is essentially what Aaron said when he picked him. So the first reason why is that he wasn't supposed to be anything special. He was a fifth round draft pick in 2019. And then his rookie year, he starts in 9 games, caught 8 touchdown passes, which was one of his better seasons that, he's had with the Giants. And we all know that he's had a drop issue, but he really has improved upon that in the last couple years. And I also think a lot of Giants fans have not given him credit for that. The team as a whole has an issue with drops. Malik Neighbors also had severely bad drops last year. So it's not just Darius Slayton. And I know Slayton gets the bulk of it because he's not Malik Neighbors, right? But I think he deserves a little bit of credit. And I like the fact that, a guy at ESPN who has picked the underrated players has noticed a guy like Darius Slayton, and he deserves a little more praise. So I like Slayton. I'm glad he's back with the Giants, and I want to see more from him this year. The last thing that Aaron said about him is that he has had a positive receiving DVOA. For those of you who don't know, it's defense adjusted value over average for 3 straight seasons. And he also made it a point to note that he's been able to do that with mediocre at best quarterback play. So imagine what he can do with these guys. Slayton should continue to work as a deep threat opposite Neighbors. He'll probably put up another quietly productive and surprisingly efficient season. And one last thing about Darius Slayton before I go is that I believe he is number 8 on the most receiving yards in Giants history. So he has the potential, if he has a really good year this year, to be top 5, top 6 for the Giants, which I think says a lot. And I think it goes back to the fact that, yes, he is underrated and underappreciated. So let's show Darius Slayton a little bit of love this year. I'm optimistic that he's going to be able to do a lot with a guy like Russell Wilson. So stay tuned for more Giants latest. Hit the subscribe button.